Welcome to the latest episode of the Edgar Burroughs mini podcasts. These short podcasts are meant to supplement the full length episodes that I do along with Jess Terrell and Scott Stewart, in which we generally talk about a book of Edgar Rice Burroughs in detail. My name is Tim DeForest. I'm the author of several books about what I call pre-digital pop culture, things like old-time radio, pulp magazines, newspaper comic strips, and so on. I keep a blog about such things at Comics, Old Time Radio, and other cool stuff. And in this episode, we are going to start talking about the 1912 novel A Princess of Mars, the first novel in Burroughs' Martian series, and in fact, the first novel he ever wrote and published. Now, A Princess of Mars was serialized in All Story magazine in 1912. Its original title was Under the Moons of Mars, and it was later retitled A Princess of Mars when published as a novel. It was Burroughs' first book, as I said, and though not as well remembered today as Tarzan, it was the first of a successful 11-book series. Now, today we're going to be taking a brief look at the foreword and at the first two chapters. Please note that I will be including spoilers, both of this novel and occasionally later novels in the series. And I would also recommend that you reread the chapters we're talking about today before listening to this podcast, as I will be assuming that those of you listening are familiar with the events recounted in it. Now, the foreword is narrated by a character who is presumably Edgar Rice Burroughs. In later novels, this is stated overtly. In later novels, Burroughs was indeed John Carter's nephew. He was also the person to whom the story of Tarzan was recounted. He was the person who was vacationing in the Sahara when David Innes popped up in his iron mole on his return trip from Pellucidar. Burroughs himself became a center point for the universe he created, the person who collected, edited, and published all these stories about other planets, lost worlds, jungle adventures, and so on. I'm not sure if in this first novel that Burroughs intended the author of the foreword to be himself. There's a number of key differences between Burroughs' life and the life of this author. The author states, for instance, that he was a young child before the Civil War, whereas Burroughs wasn't born until 1875. The author also overtly identifies himself as a member of the Carter family, though to be fair, that could be his maternal family, and he could have a different last name. Though in Burroughs' real-life mother's maiden name was Ziegler. Also, Burroughs' dad ran a furniture store, not a string of general stores as described in the foreword. But because Burroughs is described as John Carter's nephew later on in the series, he retroactively becomes the nephew in this novel, and therefore the author of this foreword. And for those of us who have locked Burroughs' stories away into a portion of our brain that secretly believes they are all true, this is eminently satisfying. So we'll just call the foreword's author Edgar Rice Burroughs. Now, the foreword is used mostly for foreshadowing. We learn that Carter was away for over a decade after the Civil War, and of course we'll soon learn that he spent 10 of those years on Mars. His athleticism and his skill as a fighting man are established. And of course the odd nature of his tomb and exact instructions for his burial hint at weird stuff to come. The novel also, because it's recounting because it's claiming to give us a true story. It helps establish the willing suspension of disbelief so that we will accept the story of a man who's teleported to another planet without questioning it. Now, in chapter one, John Carter takes over as narrator, with the rest of the novel consisting of his first-person account of his adventures. Chapter one can be described as a mini-western in terms of plot, with the prospectors being attacked by Apaches. This gets the story started with a bang, but Burroughs gets in some important characterization of John Carter, and as he did in the foreword, he introduces enough weirdness into the prose to help set us up for the hero's upcoming trip to another planet. For instance, in terms of characterization, we learn that Carter seems to be functionally immortal, with no memory of a childhood, and who has lived as a warrior and a mercenary. We get no real details of this. We aren't told how Carter is related to the rest of the Carter family without knowing who his parents are. We weren't told what his earliest memory is, even if it's an adult memory. How far back does his memory go? Did he fight with Richard the Lionheart? Was he at the Battle of Hastings? Did he sail with the Vikings? We don't know. My wife, Angela, who's rereading A Princess of Mars along with me, theorizes that he's an immortal as defined by the movie Highlander. And that would explain why he's been such a successful warrior for years without ever getting killed, because as long as he's not beheaded by another immortal, he can't be killed. And Burroughs is perfectly correct in leaving all of this a mystery, setting aside the Highlander theory, of course. It is this, more than anything else, this mystery, that helps establish that weird ambiance and prime us for a fantastic adventure. It's the first step in generating a willing suspension of disbelief. Burroughs becomes what J.R.R. Tolkien referred to as a sub-creator, building a secondary world in which impossible things can happen, but in which we are willing to believe in as we become immersed in the story we are reading. John Carter's immortality will also serve to help him fit into Martian society and live with a race of humans who have lifespans of over 1,000 years. He'll be able to marry Dejah Thoris without having to worry about growing old while she remains young. Also, if the character becomes the hero of a successful series, as he did, Burroughs doesn't have to worry about the effects of age on him in later stories. Burroughs often came up with explanations to why his heroes never aged. It wasn't just John Carter. It was Tarzan, Carson Napier on Venus, David Innes at the Earth's core in Pellucidar. All of them, for various reasons, were granted a form of functional immortality. And if you want to give a listen to our mini podcast number 7, you can hear a more detailed analysis of this. Now, we also learned, getting back to the novel, we also learned that John Carter is a brave man who is always driven to do his duty regardless of the danger involved. I like Carter's definition of heroism, in which he explains that he doesn't consider himself a hero because the option of doing anything other than his duty never occurs to him until the danger is past. John Carter is indeed a hero. He's someone who will risk and, if necessary, give his life to save a friend or a loved one. But he can't think of himself as a hero because this behavior, this heroic behavior, is completely natural to him. It's an important and insightful look at the most vital part of his character. And of course, we get direct evidence of this character trait when he risks his life to rescue Pal, even when he's near certain Pal is already dead. That rescue is typical of Burroughs' ability to write an exciting action sequence, but is also used to get John Carter into that remote cave and prepare him for his unexpected visit to the Red Planet. Now, Chapter 2, which is set in that weird cave, is a very eerie chapter, serving to fully develop the weird atmosphere we need to accept the situation when John Carter is teleported to another planet. Everything that happens is weird, from Carter's inexplicable paralysis to whatever mysterious thing exists behind him and out of his line of sight, to the panic of the Indians when they see the mysterious thing, and to, most importantly, John Carter's out-of-body experience. Well, sort of out of body. Though he can see his presumably dead body lying on the cave floor, he's not a spirit, but a flesh and blood person who breathes and feels it when he pinches himself. Now, other than his affinity with Mars, the planet of war, because of his career as a soldier, John Carter's ability to teleport to Mars is never explained, either when it happens this time at the end of the chapter or when it happens again at the beginning of the sequel of this novel. Eventually, he learns to do it voluntarily, returning to Earth on occasion to visit his nephew, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and to recount another Martian adventure. Like John Carter's past and his apparent immortality, this is something that works best when left a mystery, and Burroughs was correct at leaving it as such. Now that's it for this time. We'll pick up next time with chapter 3, where John Carter will be beginning his adventure on the Red Planet. In the meantime, once again, my name is Tim DeForest. Please visit my blog at Comics, Old Time Radio, and other cool stuff. You can find a link to my Amazon.com author page there, and I very much appreciate you listening.